Good morning, Bitcoiners. Let me give you a chance to stream in here while I stream. I'm gonna have a pre sip of coffee. Sip of coffee. Let me get up the chat. See who's around. Got to deal with a bit of the chat delay, as we know. Let me get positioned with my notes here. It is a good Friday indeed, morning. So yeah, I saw that PH. We're getting real close. 600 subs. I think I'll get it in the next 2 weeks. Yeah, PH heard about the welcome back. I guess yeah, that's true. You arrived in that mess. There's power still not on. There's some folks who still don't have power in Montreal. I've noticed that. I was originally supposed to go back on at 601. Yeah, I was. Oh, 1 second. Kids are bouncing off the walls here on a Friday morning. Good Friday, a great Friday, the greatest Friday there is. I'm back online. Bon matin à tous. I'm back online. Power and internet is back. Freezing rain in Quebec. Yeah, I guess it depends on where you are. Usually, where I am in the townships, the eastern townships, because my house in Vermont is in the eastern townships, basically. Um, it usually rain if it's freezing rain. It'll be a few degrees different from Montreal. So sometimes it'll be a few degrees cooler. Sometimes it's a few degrees warmer. So if it's falling as freezing rain, we didn't lose any power out there and all that, but that's what my family says anyway. They were fine. Indeed, good morning. I got a lot of good mornings here. I got a great show. This is going to be a great one, guys. There's a lot going on. The title of today's show is taken from a Bob Dylan lyric, and the song is called "The Changing of the Guard." And it's actually a wonderful song if ever you guys want to go and listen to it. I listened to it on repeat the night of the 2016 US presidential election. And something about it just resonated with me that night. It was one of the greatest nights ever, by the way, if everyone who was a Trump supporter remembers how much fun it was. It indeed was a hilarious night and a great time. And I was, kind of partying on my own because it's not like a lot of people shared in the enthusiasm. So I was mostly on my own. And I was in my garage in Toronto quite a bit that night. And I was replaying the song. It's kind of like I don't know, kind of like a fantasy, a lot of visual images about a land that's been decimated and destroyed. And the title comes from one of the last lyrics of the song where he says, while Eden is burning, better get ready for elimination, or else your heart must have the courage for the changing of the guard. So today, get ready for elimination, or have the courage for the Bitcoin change. I had to mix it up a little bit simply because YouTube doesn't allow for long titles. But one thing we don't have to care about when it comes to titles and all that is just acknowledging, right? The sun came up today. We got a total sunrise and Bitcoin's running. So all we have to do is have a coffee and talk about what's new. Dex, just watching the replay from yesterday. Oh, you're gonna get 2 straight hours. I hope it's still high enough energy to entertain you for 2 straight hours. As you know, as you know, we like to start every show with the fakest news we can find, and I got a great one here. Normally, I wouldn't mention his name, Craig Wright. Like I don't care. Like I find any amount of attention. He's got major mental problems. Like I just don't have time to talk about him in general. But this one was too good, and it actually ties in with everything we're going to talk about today. So I have no choice. So obviously, the challenge of Moscow time is that I can't add a punchline to it, right? I just got to tell you the news straight up as it is. And Craig Wright did us a solid here. So he's accusing Apple of breaching the copyright by including the white paper in every MacBook. So, all these stories, which is amazing, by the way. I didn't mention it yesterday on the show, this finding of the white paper with this trick that every Mac operating system has the Bitcoin white paper in it. One of my colleagues at Bitcoin Magazine was sharing it 2 nights ago, and I was blown away. I did it on my Mac, and I was like, wow, this is great, right? It was actually in my notes yesterday, forgot to mention it, but everyone had seen it. It sort of went viral, so I don't always need to go over what's super viral. You guys see it, right? But this one's too good. Craig Wright has accused Apple of copyright infringement because of the Bitcoin white paper. It's glorious. It's wonderful, right? It's just amazing. Yeah, Bitcoin Graffiti says he's a narcissist. Yeah, that's why I don't have really time for the guy, right? I can't get caught up in someone whose brain is just broken and he's just running in cycles and has major issues. I mean, he's going to kill himself or something eventually, right? We'll see. I mean, I just can't imagine. I can't imagine anything productive coming out of this guy's life unless he has a complete and total change of his ego and all the other stuff that's drawn in. But anyway, I don't care. Like, I just don't care about Craig Wright. Never have. But it did bring up one idea that I had just about how ensconced in the old world Craig really is, right? Copyrights and legal battling and saber rattling in courts and all this stuff. I know at Bitcoin Magazine we were heavily involved in Hodl-Not's defense from a fundraising point of view. We covered it. We had journalists in the courtroom, just trying to end it altogether. Even I think that's too much. I'm of the belief you don't give these people attention, but there are legal things, and he is bullying people, so nobody likes a bully, so let's go get him, right? But it's the copyright piece. When I was in law school, I wrote, to graduate, the way I did my schedule or whatever, I had to do a couple of directed learning. You could call them dissertations. That's not what we called them at the time. They were just sort of directed learning as part of graduating, and you had to write a couple of papers over your last year, 2 papers, one each semester over your last year in law school while you graduated, in the year that you graduated. So I did that. And I did one on immigration because I had been working in the executive branch with the Harper government on immigration. And I was writing ghostwriting blog posts for an immigration law firm. So I was very familiar with the whole area, and as a Quebecer, I thought I would do one on the shared competency. Anyway, that doesn't matter. The one that I did well on both of these. I was a terrible law student, by the way. I did it all in French. I was terrible, like just no good, right? I didn't fail anything, but I was like a straight C, sometimes B student. A couple of A's, and they were on these papers. So the papers went a lot better for me because I didn't have to read questions in French and a test that I only had 2 hours to write with 5 questions. And it was, law school is not easy. Happily finished and did well enough for my purposes. But anyway, the paper that I wrote was all on gene patenting. And I've mentioned Michael Crichton before, what a big fan I am of Michael Crichton. I was deep into Michael Crichton my whole time in law school. And one of the things I was deep into was this gene patenting issue. And I learned a lot about what happened with gene patenting, as well as the whole realm of copyright. And I made a prediction in that paper about what would happen to both gene patenting. So in the end, gene patenting ended in America. I predicted how it would end, and I did it like this. So more or less what was going on was they were using science, right? It was these big cataloging the isolation of genes, in particular, one that causes breast cancer, the BRCA4 gene, I think it's called, if I remember correctly. And all they did was just trial and error. It was just literally, is this the gene? No. Is this the gene? No. Is this the gene? No. And they would just do trial and error. And when they isolated the gene that did have some correlation or even causation to, in this case, breast cancer, they patented the test to find the gene. They patented everything to do with the gene, even the gene itself. And this gene patenting thing ended up getting recognized by US courts because of the gulf between their understanding of science and what science really was. Now, as someone who went in my CEGEP time in science, we had done gene isolation as just a lab in junior college, more or less. It was not science. There was no innovation. So the definition of a patent, of course, is that it's got to be something you didn't stumble upon. You have to have shown expertise to isolate it. And it's also got to be commercial. There's a third one. It's got to be new and innovative. You have to show so it's got to be new. You have to show real methods in creating this, so you can't be an accident. It can't be a natural occurrence, and this is one of the big changes that I noticed at the time, that was a weakness in the argument of gene patenting. And finally, it's got to have commercial application. So the commercial application one's obviously right, but is it in nature? Right? Is it natural or not? You can't patent natural things. In this case, they said because of the science they used to isolate it, that in fact it was, they used expertise and it wasn't necessarily natural, even though you can find all of these genes and we all have them. So my argument from there was that this would fall eventually, because eventually it would get to a court that could understand the delta between what a lower court thought was science. They got bamboozled by these big papers that were written by scientists, the gene isolation things, but it's not expertise. It's not even new, right? It was just literally trial and error. So when I argued this, I said, I believe this will end up in the Supreme Court. And this was something that Michael Crichton was already fighting for. He wrote a book on this, I think called, trying to remember which book it was, but I don't remember right now. He wrote a book on this, and it was all about gene patenting. So that's Michael Crichton's strategy, right? He would go into some policy issue and then write a story, a fictional story, but that put all the pieces in place that you wanted to know about. So Jurassic Park would have been part of this gene expertise he developed, but he went one step further. One second. So the gene patenting issue became something that I predicted early on. And I said, what's going to happen is it's going to go to a court. And this court, when it finally gets to a Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court in the United States, so not just a state court, it was being heavily litigated in California at the time. I said it'll be over because they'll understand you can't do this. By 2012, I was right. It went to the Supreme Court. We found out that the whole gene patenting scam was over. They said you can't. It's exactly as I said. It was natural, and it wasn't necessarily science that found it. It was just stupid human trial and error. It was the basic exercise of eliminating potentials until you isolate the one that can't be. So I don't know what, all the tests that you build on top of that, I think are still patentable, but you can't actually patent the gene sequence. And with my prof, so when you write these things, you have a prof that helps you. You go to meetings with the prof over the course of the year and talk about where your research is, talk about where the paper is. And this prof and I spoke many, many times about, so I was talking about gene patenting. Patenting is not exactly copyright. But I started to realize at the time that copyright, with everything that was going on in the internet, and as someone who grew up in that whole file sharing era, who was doing nothing but file sharing while I was in college and in law school and all this stuff, had a feeling that the whole regime of copyright was going to be over, and eventually it would end, right? That copyright was part of the printing press. It came with the printing press. It was invented when the printing press was invented. So it came about from Gutenberg's revolution. And I made a prediction right then that it would die with Gutenberg's invention. And indeed, we see now copyright maintenance, they've basically abdicated as far as the media, the music and movies. They'll take stuff down online for streaming. They've had great success with the subscription model and different apps. But the whole idea of being able to copyright things and have that copyright recognized as a foundation of the economy, I said, it's not going to last, right? It's not going to last. Now, am I 100% right about it? I think so. Think about what happens now with AI, right? I think the future of movies at this point is just going to be someone saying, well, modify this story, give me deep fakes of these actors, redo the special effects. I've already seen some of these 1 or 2 minute clips that people are producing with AI. and they look like they have a budget in the hundreds of millions, right? Just for there's one that's been floating around of a helicopter, and the camera is inside the helicopter, and it's seeing a bunch of ships. Some are on fire. There's been a battle out in a port. There's a mega shark in the water that eats a boat, then eats the helicopter, and the helicopter crashes in the water, and the camera's under the water. Like, you couldn't, this would take years in normal Hollywood processes to make. And although it definitely had a small hint of being fake, it wasn't obvious, right? You had to look for 2 seconds and see some of the lines, and that should be eliminated in no time. So the future of movies, I imagine, is going to be lots of characters that you can't copyright that are already out there. How much fan fiction there already is in Star Wars and in Harry Potter and all these other things, right? It's full of fan fiction all over the place. And the fan fiction piece is going to, I think, create a whole bunch of ways that this will change. Now, I bring all this up because when I start looking at the US presidential election in 2024, and if you look at the undercurrents, what's going on right now, if you look at what's going on with the US dollar, with media, with politics, you can start to see that just like copyright, everything's about to change. Everything is in the process of changing. And the 2024 US presidential election might just be the convergence of these conversations. And I'll go over how I think it could happen, right? So first of all, just on the economy, just on the way Americans have run their economy this whole time. The Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, he's a backer of Rumble, for example. There are people out there who say he's a Bitcoiner. I've been trying to get him to come to speak at our event in Miami, May 18th to 20th, Bitcoin 2023. But I've got enough U.S. politicians and senators, so I'm not really like a dog on a bone with this J.D. Vance guy. I've reached out, think he's cool, think he has a lot, think he has lots to say, but he did have this to say, which I think is amazing. And what he did was, when he was talking with the Fed Chairman Powell during that Senate hearing, if you remember, when the banks were having trouble about a month ago, he mentioned something that was really interesting. He called the U.S. financial system, right, with Wall Street and the whole concentration of the financial system of the world in America, with America being the producer of the heavily privileged global reserve currency. He said something interesting. I never thought about it this way before, that they have the resource curse, and their one resource is debt that they export. So they have Dutch disease. If you guys don't know what Dutch disease is, it's the following. In the 1970s, when Holland was still had so much access to its near and accessible just offshore oil reserves, they were exporting so much oil that they ended up having the guilder, the Dutch money, ended up going up in value, but it decimated the rest of the economy because they never had the flexibility to have an export-driven economy anymore, because everything was tied to the Dutch guilder, which was tied to the demand for oil, which caused everything to go up, which meant that their exports became way more expensive. So over time, it ended up hollowing out the economy. Now, every other resource country in the world is obsessed with Dutch disease and not replicating it. The Norwegians, who are just across the water, created their whole sovereign fund in order to not be the Dutch, in order to not get Dutch disease. Alberta in Canada did the same. They were obsessed with this Dutch disease thing and were very worried about it. So they created a system where royalties from the oil payments would go into a fund, and the fund would go into blah, 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 blah. But the whole point was to plan for having this big hole in your balance sheet, because one resource was so popular that it created a situation where you had this black hole on the rest of the economy. And I mention this because, so I noticed the JD Vance thing, and it was being shared by Balaji yesterday, but it also reminded me, because I was on the Bitcoin Magazine Spaces yesterday with Max Kaiser and Stacy was saying exactly this point, right? She was saying, yeah, wow, as a Dutchie, I never thought about it. Oh, you're Dutch, okay, yeah. You never heard about Dutch disease? Yeah, no, Bitcoin graffiti is a real thing. Dutch disease is an obsession for any. When I worked in Canada in the Senate, we would hear about Dutch disease a lot because we were worried about it at the time. But it's a real economic phenomenon, right? And Balaji was talking about it today, and Stacy mentioned it on the show yesterday. That's why I bring it up today. That's what it made me think of, right? So Dutch disease being a real issue, and Vance is talking about it, right? He draws parallels to the classic resource curse, suggesting the dollar's global role contributed to financialization at the expense of investment in the real economy. And so you can even think about it from the point of view of Appalachia, right? Appalachia had a type of Appalachia, the region in the United States, Pennsylvania, Ohio, anywhere where they get the oil in the United States and the U.S. East Coast, Northeast Coast. Here's what it looks like, right? One of the reasons you hear a lot about the study of regional history of Appalachia is to describe that they have a resource curse, right? It's the resource curse is another way of describing it. Because of that, it didn't develop different. It lacked the full. If you look at the American economy, right, the whole country, it's by far the most sophisticated economy on earth. It's not even close, right? If you go from California to New York to Florida, Texas, and all the pieces in between, the country's economy is very diverse, the most diverse we've ever seen. Different regions can have limitations, and in this case, Appalachia had the resource curse. So what they say is a lot of coal in Central Appalachia that enables a certain amount of consumption, but there's other things, and they weren't always good at grabbing those, right? So JD Vance says that it's part of like an unbalanced economic development, and it creates unbalanced politics afterwards. So the Dutch disease and the middle income trap that happens from this, right? Because it's those folks who get caught up in it. There's no more jobs. Very difficult to have the consumption you want, right? But what it ends up doing is forcing everyone to start thinking of diversification, right? Now, what ended up happening back then is, in the case of Holland, they went straight into diversification, but they missed a bit of the initial bump you would have gotten by having planned for this. So that's why the other places have done that, right? And here's what this JD Vance guy mentioned about what happens in our case when your actual resource that you're exporting is debt, right? Because, so just to pull back for a second to explain what's going on, if you didn't know how the T-bills and US debt works, more or less it's like this. Because the US economy and everything is measured in the US dollar and there's a demand for US dollar, if you ship the debt, what you're actually doing is encouraging currency manipulation, right? So the Dutch guilder went straight up in the air because of their resource that they had, their curse of their resource. And other countries didn't want that in the case of the United, or they wanted that, but they wanted to make sure theirs stayed lower. So when you buy the US debt, you're subsidizing the US consumption base. You're basically saying, I want to export to you, and Korea did it a lot. I've mentioned before here many times when I lived in Korea and I would go out for coffee with, like basically college-aged people. They would all be talking about slinging coins because they wanted to get away from currency manipulation. They would go back and forth between the US dollar depending on what the rumors were. And they would just look to not lose money. And I had never heard of this because if you're from North America, that's just not something you do. Like it looked like they were, Wall Street tycoons to me at the time, right? I was like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean hedging against depreciation? I don't even know what you mean. Now, of course, I was really young at the time, and I was exposed to all this, and it came in handy as I went forward. But that's basically what's going on. Countries would manipulate their currency and push this curse onto America. Right now, America asked for it, so I'm not claiming America's a victim here. But what you end up getting is a situation where because America has this resource curse, it looks a lot like the Dutch system. And Stacey mentioned it yesterday. I never thought of it so simply that America has Dutch disease, except because you tie it to resources. You never think of exporting debt as a resource. And that's exactly what Stacey said yesterday. When you export debt as a resource, it can turn into this situation immediately. So Balaji was mentioning that. I thought it was pretty cool that Stacey mentioned it on the same day. And then, so I'm sharing it with all of you guys today. So that's just one aspect of the American system. You've got the Fed, you've got Dutch disease, you've got a major impairment now on our system, one that's known about, right? This is a known issue that other countries have, that other countries try to mitigate, that is nasty, nasty, nasty. And now when you have focused, you can see America has it in this weird thing because you don't think of debt as a resource, but it's all it's all America's been exporting for years now. This debt. But it gets worse. It gets worse, right? It's not just the Dutch disease that America has, right? It gets worse. Raoul Pal also got retweeted by Balaji, and Raoul Pal, right? Now, Raoul Pal, I'll say the following about him. Just want to see. So they bid up the Gilder so they could buy the gas. Yeah. Yeah. In the case of Raoul Pal, here's what I'll say. I first met Raoul in 2017, and I actually had him in a debate, Bulls and Bears of Bitcoin. I had Tom Lee, who I had just got, fund strat guy. I had gone and done some consultations with them over the summer. I'm not sure if I orange pilled him, but he wasn't quite there. And then I spent some time with them, and they started talking about Bitcoin all the time and generational stuff and all that. So I had him as a bull, Tom Lee as a bull for Bitcoin, debating Raoul Pal as a bear. And the reason why Raoul Pal became a bear was because he thought shitcoins were a dilution of Bitcoin. That's how he thought at the time. That's how Raoul Pal thought at the time. Now, if you don't know what Raoul Pal ended up becoming, he's a media guy with Real Vision. I kind of like Real Vision. They've done some interesting videos. I know some of the people over there, former CoinDeskers who I knew from my time in New York. And so he ended up embracing just years later the shitcoinery. But just remember, this is someone who can change their mind, and we love people who can change their minds, right? That's an important thing. So Raoul went from being anti-shitcoin because it diluted Bitcoin to being, which I thought was the best argument for being a bear on Bitcoin at the time, right? In 2017, I said the best argument if you're not confident in Bitcoin is because shitcoins can bleed into Bitcoin and therefore take away the limited nature of the issuance or the creation, I should say. So I thought that was a rather clever way, and I couldn't find anyone as high profile as Raoul who would make that argument, but it was a real, I didn't want someone, you're never going to get away with it because of the regulators, right? That was stupid. I didn't care about that. What I cared about was something that made sense, and he said it would bleed over and the cultures would mix. He didn't anticipate maximalism. He didn't anticipate the cultural moorings that Bitcoiners created have continued to propagate. He didn't think in those terms. Now, say what you want about his understanding of Ethereum and all that. I don't follow that at all. I don't care what he has to say about it. I do care, however, when he starts talking about foreign exchange and real estate. And here's what he wrote about how big the changes are for real estate, commercial real estate in particular, right? Here's what he writes. Commercial real estate is a big ongoing problem for the big important banks. 50% of people haven't gone back to the office, and as leases come up for renewal, they will just not be renewed, leaving a long tail of non-performing loans on the books of the regional banks. There are $2 trillion of loans to the commercial real estate sector in the smaller banks, according to the IMF. No amount of low rates will get people back to the office. The world has changed. As the ECB did back in 2012, the Fed is going to have to take a lot of non-performing loans onto their books to keep the system solvent. This whole situation is much like the EU banking crisis in 2009 to 2012. I just don't see an outcome to this banking mess without a few more trilli tacked into the Fed balance sheet over the next 18 months and rates slashed. I also struggle to see a fast rebound in employment at the back end of this recession due to AI eating jobs. Fiscal stimulus will be writ large in 2024, ahead of the election, right? So he's saying fiscal stimulus before the 2024 election, a big deal. I agree with that. I 100% agree with that. And that's what we're leading up to today. QE will work in goosing up the value of a lot of other collateral, but at the cost of lowering the value of the denominator, right? So inflation, right? This is the way the world works now, he says. So we got Dutch disease with the actual policy levers around the American system, right? We've got the real estate part, right? Now we've also got just the the cultural trend going on. If you guys saw in Paris, right? They stormed BlackRock yesterday, and they like burnt the inside of the building, and they went crazy over there. They've been going crazy all over Paris, but now they're over the target, and they went into BlackRock yesterday, smashed the building, caused fires. And I think that Occupy movement thread that's been around since 2012 is about to get, or 2011 was it? Yeah, is about to get reignited again, right? And you're starting to see folks direct their anger towards banks and banking institutions. And it's just in Paris right now. It hasn't necessarily come to America, but I'm predicting it is going to come to America, right? We're going to get a reignition of the disdain people have for these financial institutions, but in a real tangible way, right? You've also got the rumors now of the CBDC, the Fed Now system. You've also got this incompetence of our leaders. Remember the other day I was telling you about the Lagarde interview, and I couldn't understand what was going on because she looked so foolish. She was like, "Do you hear me?" Because they even had the parts of when she just logged on. Can you see me? You know, she was being the typical boomer. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Right? She was doing all of that stuff. So it turned out it was this Vovan and Lexus. I guess they're Polish pranksters, and they call people up. And they called her up and they pretended they were Zelensky, and they got on the line with her. So I was mentioning I didn't quite understand what was happening, and this was a few weeks ago. Well, I found out because they did it again with a former president of France. They did it with François Hollande, who was the president during the 2014 beginning of the Ukrainian, well, beginning for some of the Ukrainian conflict. And so the one with Lagarde, they get her to admit that the digital CBDC thing in Europe is going to be ready by October. And she says in that when they pull her into the trap, they says there will be control. You're right. It's completely controlled by us. And that's the point. Right? So she says to Zelensky, straight up, this is what's going on. I don't know how they fake the face, but I guess with AI or whatever, deep fake. So she said in that interview, and you got to see it. It's quite funny to watch her think she's being candid with a leader, but she's not. Right? It's good. The Hollande one, they found another smoking gun, if you will. They knew that in 2014 it would lead to war. The what are they called? The Minsk Accords, right? The ones they signed in Belarus, which ended the 2014 issue and gave Russia Crimea and that town they just keep bombing into the ground that doesn't even, they keep fighting over it, Donetsk or whatever, but doesn't even exist anymore. But they keep fighting over the burnt out rubble, right? I mean, maybe it makes sense to have a big pile of rubble. I wish they would just only fight in the rubble and then make it a show, right, where people could watch it. But they're not interested in entertainment. As morbid as it sounds, right? It's better than the whole fighting going everywhere, I'd say, right? Just let them fight there, hand to hand or something. So we got Fed Now coming this summer. We get the European one coming in October. So right away, from the point of view of the economy, from the point of view of the banks, everything's changing. I mean, really changing. Not a little bit, not, oh, did you hear about that policy? Different world. As different a world as I mentioned with copyright, right? It's over. Like it's with banking, it's about to undergo changes that are the same as when the original file sharing stuff started in America. It's that big. And it can affect in the same way that copyright has been completely altered by file sharing technologies. This is a similar instance where the change is that big. And how can the change be prevented? Well, it's not going to be from the political leaders from before. It's just incompetence all around, right? Is anyone going to listen to Joe Biden? Is anyone going to listen to Hollande? Is anyone going to listen to whoever else is out there? I mean, it's very difficult. There are people who understand what's going on with CBDCs, and they have a chance, right? We saw DeSantis looks like he's launching his campaign 100% against CBDCs. You get Vivek, who keeps going on about no CBDCs, right? It's becoming a real political issue. Now, I predict Bitcoin and CBDCs are going to be the number one issue in the 2024 election. I've said a issue. I think it's going to be the number one issue, simply because the amount of change that we have seen in the past little while all culminates with Bitcoin and CBDCs. It's the only subject that actually gathers all of these strands and unknowns and divisive things and brings them into one conversation. So it's going to pack the conversation into one unit, and you're going to be able to have this semblance of a conversation about it. It'll still get full of psyops, and you're still going to have the polarities, but nevertheless, you're going to have the ability to bring Bitcoin to the absolute front of the conversation when it comes to the 2024 election. It's going to be the main thing discussed, which is crazy, right? Which is crazy. And that's what I'm predicting. I'm predicting that Bitcoin is going to be the number one question in the 2024 election. And there's reasons for it besides the failure of the banks, the failure of policymakers, and just how much change there is. You're also not going to be able to have the conversation in the mainstream media simply because they're just not credible, right? They're just not credible. If you look at everything that happened yesterday with Matt Taibbi and MSNBC, so yesterday, if you didn't notice this, and it was actually predicted, Michael Schellenberger said the following yesterday, early afternoon. He says, apparently this will happen 2 hours from now. All right, let me make sure I have the whole thing. Yeah. So what he's saying here is that, he's referring to another one. So I'll read, this is from Boston Joan first, right? As I look at the state of the field of misinformation, disinformation research today, it's a full-on battle. I see institutions taking a step away from addressing the issue. I see government agencies backing away from taking action. I see political operatives, and she goes on and on and on. So Michael Schellenberger refers to this. He goes, apparently this will happen 2 hours from now. They know they're losing. They know we are going to defund and dismantle them. And what ends up happening is Matt Taibbi goes on to MSNBC. And he ends up getting into a debate with Mehdi Hassan, right? Mehdi Hassan. Now, Mehdi Hassan is not an honest person. Right? Let's just be clear. He's not an honest person. He's not one of the only people left in America performing journalism. Matt Taibbi, however, is. So you get this awful situation from yesterday where everyone who looks at the video, depending on which side you're on, which bubble you're in, you think the other person slammed the other person. You think your guy won, right? Because it's become sports, right? It's become absolute sports, and not even worthwhile. It's as useless as watching a sports ball, right? He might as well have watched NHL last night because it had all the same relevancy of watching these two people, or watching the reactions to this debate between Mehdi Hassan and Matt Taibbi. So what ends up happening is Taibbi goes on. Mehdi Hassan says, you got these little errors wrong in your Twitter files thing. You know, how many things has Matt Taibbi written? He's had like 7 of the Twitter files, or 6 or something like that. You know, each of them is like 40 tweets. So he picked out, right, of the 300 tweets that are like official Twitter files, Matt Taibbi tweets, he found out like the number was wrong and a few things. And so Matt Taibbi responds to him. He goes, Mehdi, like, you're still censoring Hunter Biden stories, and you're not being honest about big things, right? You get me on the little things. What about the big things? And Mehdi Hassan had to, I've never even spoken about Hunter Biden. Now, of course, everyone has shown all the lies that Mehdi Hassan has engaged in when it comes to the Hunter Biden laptop story. Since 2020, he denied it was censored. Now it was, these are softcore porn pictures, and that's why we don't do it. He's gone back to the nudity question, right? So it's the nudity thing. And so when you think of Mehdi Hassan and Matt Taibbi, and you see the reaction, you see that half the people think Mehdi Hassan put an end to Taibbi. All of Taibbi's people say, Taibbi dunked on Mehdi Hassan because of the laptop story. Now, even just pulling back for a second, it sort of mimics what we see with Trump and Biden when it comes to lying and honesty. You know, Trump is a major exaggerator, absolutely lies about details all the time, right? Like if we can't admit that about Trump, then you got a problem, right? Trump is very loose with the details. But I've never heard him say a deceptive, directionally wrong, totally opposite of that lie Never since he's been president. And if it has been that, it hasn't been something that is going to really hurt anyone, right? It's not like he's lying about um, um, entire swaths of people, right? Whereas Biden, I don't know if he's truthful about every detail, but I see him with big lies, right? Like Charlottesville. The Charlottesville hoax was the point of his election. Now you might say, well, what's wrong? What's so bad? It's just a little omission. The difference is it actually puts people in harm's way. Because if you start charging that half the American population are racist Nazis, right? You got a different vulnerability that you've created. Your lie actually has effects on them. It actually puts a target on people's back who defend Trump, right? And we've seen that for a long time. People who defend Trump are targeted all the time. And not only targeted by mainstream media, they're targeted just by normal NPCs who are all hopped up on dopamine and want to fight for freedom and all of this stuff, right? Fight the Nazis, punch a Nazi in the face, right? So a lot of this lying, you can see the proportions of it are totally different, right? You get one group that just lies as a matter of system, right? And that's what I see when I see Mehdi Hassan and Taibbi argue. Now, I'm not saying that one of these people are going to win the argument. That's not what we're saying. Oh, if they just win the argument, it's going to go away. What I'm saying is you're not actually going to find any useful information there. So what happens now is it's almost as if what the mainstream media is going to be trying to frame the 2024 election as is not going to work. It's going to take on a frame and a life of its own. And that's one of Bitcoin's big trajectories here, is that it won't be possible to omit discussions about Bitcoin because it's going to break out of the shell. You're going to have people talking about it. And because the mainstream media has already turned off so many people and continues to turn off people, it's not really the persuading of people inside of that bubble to have them change their mind. It's the one or two that just quit, walk away every day, right? There's people who start to realize every day they don't want to be a part of that. I don't see it going the other way around. I don't see Trump people going, oh, Trump did something today and I'm finally done, right? Like, I'm now done. I'm going to go support Biden or the Democrats or anything. So I only see a bleed and a leakage in one direction. I don't see it in two directions. I could be wrong, right? And my predictions here are that there's only leakage in one direction. But the leakage doesn't even have to be in support of Trump. It could just be in the narrative control aspects, people talking about other things like Bitcoin. So this will be the first election, the 2024 US presidential election. We've seen elections in social media before. We've seen elections take place and arguments take place outside of the mainstream. The mainstream still put the focus on issues, and those sort of were the reference and then bled out afterwards. I think that's over. I think the main issues are going to come from the outside this time, and we haven't seen that before, right? That's totally new, totally new. So even today, you can have a great example of that. We've got apparently there's been a leak of information about battlefront casualties, strategies, everything from the US government. So it was what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. Here's the facts. Here's what we're planning for spring. Now, it was leaked. Right away, US intelligence is saying this is Russian disinformation. It's not a real leak. Numbers were changed. It's not accurate, right? Now, you'll always hear on this gathering here in the morning, we don't believe anything about Ukraine, good or bad. It's a black hole of information, and you should always allow for a few days to go by before you make any opinion on what you see coming out of Ukraine, including this, right? But that's the weakness, that you can't trust anything means we're going to have this buffer between what the mainstream media broadcasts and projects and what everyone ends up debating and thinking about. So while I still think they can hijack certain days, right? I think there'll be days where we're just talking about what the mainstream media is talking about. It's going to be fewer and fewer days, fewer and fewer subjects. It won't be narrative consistency. It won't be one venue filled with their talking points that we all debate. It's going to break out all over the place and in different issues. And for those reasons, I can see it becoming a major opportunity to have subjects on the ballot that we just never thought of before, right? We just never thought of them. Um, Institutions that are non-American supranational institutions like the UN or any of these other things as well are not going to be able to um, gather the debate, not going to be able to frame the debate in a way that's useful. Look at the UN. This is from yesterday, trying to deal with the Nord Stream pipeline. So this, now that Russia's running the Security Council now, right? And so they pushed forward an independent investigation into the Nord Stream pipeline attack. Of course, United States, UK, France said, "No way, no, don't do that." Right? We can't look into what happened. It's not going to work, right? So so that's gone, right? So that's gone. So if you think of the perfect storm now, right? The perfect storm. We've got Dutch disease in the central bank in the Federal Reserve. You've got the CBDC, which they're saying is coming in the summertime. You've got the collapse of real estate, various other industries, right? U.S. debt exporting, political mismanagement. You get media failure, right? All of these things converging mean that we have there's fertile ground for radical change, fertile ground for radical change. And when that radical change, when that fertile ground that can house this radical change gets charged, you're going to see it attracting way more people because there's a feeling in general that things have to change drastically. And anyone who's going for political incrementalism is going to fail, right? It's just not the way. Like, what policy and what are they going to do and what's going on with that, right? Disillusioned voters, I think, are going to try and find a way to bring some stability to their own minds about this. And it won't be, I think, asking for more centralized power. Some will obviously do that, right? But there's going to be this, let's say, perpetuation of subjects that would have been omitted. So the number one power the media has had, we've been talking about that for a long time. It's not so much the lies, it's the omitting of subjects. It's like, just take a look at the CNN webpage, take a look at MSNBC webpage, right? It's the same stories each and every time. And they omit ones. It's Trump did this, white supremacists did that. These people are vulnerable. Look at this victim. So sad. If it wasn't for these people, it wouldn't be a victim. So things are coming to a head, right? And I do think, right, if you see this statement, I don't know if you guys noticed this. Now, I think they're referring to DeFi, right? I think they're referring to DeFi with this statement. But this is something that was shared just the other day, or just yesterday. Let me find the document here. Anyway, what they say is, I don't think I saved it. What it says is that the US government now sees decentralized cryptocurrencies as a national security threat. What have we been predicting here for a long time? That it's here, right? We are now here, and we're going to be threatened by these institutions. It's coming, right? I predicted we'll be hunted by the summer. We're going to be hunted, right? Bitcoiners are going to be hunted. And if you see things like what was just published, let me actually find it just so you guys have some visibility into it. Because it was a good little piece here, and I had it. Yeah, here. US Treasury says decentralized crypto markets threaten national security, right? That's from yesterday. So you start to see this situation where either they win, right? The CBDC folks win, and Bowtied Bull. I'll be interviewing Bowtied Bull shortly. If you guys don't know who Bowtied Bull is, he's a pretty interesting guy. He created the whole bow-tied thing on the internet, right? He invented and coined the slogan, "Probably nothing." That was him, right? He never got credit for it, but he did that. And he wrote a "What if?" The year is 2037, right? So he wrote a piece on this, what the world looks like. He just published it today on Substack. Here's what he says. FedNow has issued a red alert for Sean, who overspent his FedNow CBDC allotment on push-up bra Susan's OnlyFans virtual AI feet photo event. His transaction is blocked. He also didn't realize that transaction was going to a man LARPing as a girl with advanced AI filters with ChatGPT 7 technology to make her voice match Sean's exact preferences. A combo Russian/French accent is preferred. CBDC FedNow is backed by the founder of BlockFi, Celsius, Doquan, Grant Cardone, Ty Lopez, SBF's Polycule, President Powell, Joe Biden, and of course the founder of Ripple. It has uncapped supply, no on-chain data to verify funds, and all smart contracts can be blocked if you spend too much or too little on the wrong products or services. His transaction is blocked. Oh, yeah. If you pause and look around, thankfully you're surrounded by non-cartoon characters who continue to use sats to survive off the land developed by Bowtied Broke and maintained by Bowtied Farmer. You crawl out the tent to catch some vitamin D, which is luxury since most are plugged into the metaverse to watch gender-neutral Olympics. The Olympics now feature a combination of LeBron James, Michael Jordan, Wilt Chamberlain, and Stephon Curry gene therapy, creating a male who identifies as a female. She averages 9,999 points per game scoreboard limit and is the only athlete in history to go pro at age 4. The remaining 4 players on the court average 0 rebounds, 0 assists, 0 steals, 0 blocks, and 0 turnovers a game, but are celebrated as champions for the 20th year in a row, taking their 4th gold medal, and are featured on Bud Light ads across the globe. Since you are not allowed to enter into the first part of the metaverse without giving the government geolocation chip, blood sample, and DNA sequence to President Powell, you're banished from the festival for good. You receive a phone call. It is from your 12-year-old daughter asking for a few computer coins to pay for weight loss pills. You know it's a trap since it is illegal to lose weight in the United States since the Deflation Reduction Act was passed in 2032. Being in shape is a hate crime unless you are a preconceived neutral athlete developed by San Francisco Tenderloin. You take a sigh of relief and check the candidate pool for the upcoming election. To your surprise, despite the S&P 500 now comprising 490 technology companies and 10 companies pretending not to be technology companies, the average age of the candidates is 85 years old. A new rule was passed that if a candidate understands how to use a hardware wallet, they are deemed a danger to society. That was in the news today. Instead of having a person in debates or virtual debates, candidates on each side are determined by the number of views obtained by their 10 submitted TikTok videos. All views are counted as equal, and for some reason, the winner always has strong ties to India and the Philippines. Currently, it looks like the left is going to win only because Barry Silbert and Brian Armstrong handed all of their computer coins when a mean email was sent over telling them to give up assets back in 2032. They have enough funding to guarantee the view count. You sit back and think about how lucky you are to have made it. The circus continues and you're still insulated. You think back to 2033 when the official ban on RAID, ortho, and spectricide went into effect. Since bugs are the primary source of food, if caught killing them, you are immediately reported to PETA and are sent off to 6 months of community service. In addition to the bug killing ban, there is also a luxury tax on having a home that is producing cockroaches, milk, crickets, or grasshoppers. This reduces your FedNow credits as it pertains to food, and there is an additional wealth tax if an ant colony is found on your property, which is now leased to the government and no longer your deed with the new 100-year lease rules for property rights. All isn't lost, though. While many of your friends haven't made it, the ones that have continued to create generational wealth by fading the masses on the island. In fact, Lady Luck herself was revealed and decided to reside on the island. So there you go. That is kind of like the mandibles, but more hopeful. So he's been talking about Degen Island for a long time, which is where all the Bitcoin people are going to have to go live. So this is just him telling the other side of the story. So, it's going to become an issue because people understand everyone understands, even the ones on the crazy side, right? Understand that we are at a critical juncture in America, and 2024 election is going to change everything. And I think it's going to be one of the biggest orange pilling years we've ever had. And luckily, the simulation winking at us, it coincides with our halving. So can you imagine a Bitcoin bull cycle while all the fiat world is melting before your eyes. It's glorious. It's perfect. It's preordained. 'Twas written in the stars, as our friend Bowtied often says. All right, let's have some comments, and then I gotta beat it. Let me see where we are here. So there's the Dutch Gilder stuff. Here we go. What do Bitcoiners do with all that office space? Yeah, I think a lot of the New York, anyway, Midtown will go residential, I think. I don't see what else they can do. Inside greeneries, yeah, they can do that. Vertical farming. Okay, I see what's going on. Yeah. Yeah, I think Detroit might be a great example of where some of this is headed, because Detroit's like hollowed out in so many ways. There's entire like suburban neighborhoods that are gone. The roads are still there, but there's no houses. There's like one house per 4 blocks or something. But the land is so good. I mean, it's such good land. You could farm it. So I do imagine they're going to have some farms in cities. Labor could be hosted on site too. Yeah. They'll probably become favelas in big cities. Could be. People are learning. There's so much information out there thanks to the internet now, of course, that cuts both ways. But overall, it's an amazing thing. Yeah, I think that's the difference, is that, when people say Rome and all that, well, having the information is a big help. Lens frame, isn't that what life is all about? Perspective is reality until it punches you in the face, yeah, as Bud says. Yeah, I think Mike Tyson's quote, his famous quote, is going to go down as one of the great quotes of all time. I think Bitcoiners will embrace it one day, which is, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. So good. So good. Bitcoin will be even more amplified if the next bull run happens on schedule. Yeah, that's what I mean, Daniel. Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. It's going to be bigly. But money is psychology. It's a battle for everyone's minds. It absolutely is. Yeah, it absolutely is. Nature doesn't need money. It's only for humans. Well, we need time, and we need a convertible unit for time. So we don't need money, but time is money. Greatest time to be alive. You might think so, since it's the fourth turning, but you can't deny. I love it. I love the 2020s. So far, so good. Dutch disease was like the petro gilder by accident. It was. Yeah. And like I said, this is like for other places like Alberta or Norway or everything in Saudi Arabia. They want to avoid Dutch disease at all costs. Money is time, and it can be taken away in a heartbeat if your psychology is wrong. Yeah. That's it. Bitcoin Hunger Games, great. Yeah. Bitcoin is very about history. Let's go. Kind of like the mandibles, but more. It'll never get that bad. I have more confidence in humanity. We're not that dumb. Yeah, I'm with you, Bitrio. I'm totally with you. Yeah. It'll be. I continue to think of it in terms of when you had the Reformation. People just, it goes out of style. Like, that's all it is. Fashion has a lot to do with it, right? And I don't mean like Paris runway fashion. I just mean that people's tastes change. And if your taste is Joe Biden and the security state, which it is for some people, there's a lot of comfort in it. But that's why I put in the title, you have to have the courage, like what Bob Dylan said, right? Either you get ready for elimination, or your heart finds the courage for the changing of the guard. It's not easy, but it's more fun. So who wrote that? Yeah. The piece that I wrote was written by Bow-Tied Bull, and it's only available in his Substack. He's like the only Substack I pay for. It's probably the most popular Substack on Wall Street, I'll be honest with you. But a lot of people don't know who he is. I'll meet him for the first time in April, but I've been talking about him for, Degen Island. Yeah. Bow-Tied Bull, Degen Island. Yeah. It's Bow-Tied Bull, Degen Island. So anytime you see Bow-Tied on the internet, it's part of his thing. It's people copying him and being irreverent like him. So he's got like bow-tied ranger, bow-tied bro, bow-tied fitness, bow-tied. I mean, there's so many bow-tied. You're going to see them now, and they're everywhere, right? All this bow-tied stuff. So he was the one who first coined Bitcoin, probably nothing, and from there has gotten, just the whole thing took off. He was a big, I believe, the whole Bored Apes thing secretly was pumped by him, with the total degen. Like you got to understand the morality of this guy. He's not a typical Bitcoin maxi. Let's put it that way, right? He's definitely not religious about Bitcoin, but he's a Bitcoiner. I would definitely categorize him as a Bitcoiner, just not as a maxi. But 100% a Bitcoiner. So yeah, he's hilarious, right? But the thing he wrote was hilarious, and he's got. I don't even know if he writes them himself. He's got a team of writers now. He's the newsletter is very, very. The Substack is very successful. So, all right, team, 2024. Let's have the courage. Sounds unethical. Yeah, I wouldn't put him. Hold on. What can the average person do to advance the Bitcoin future? I think it's really just counting in Bitcoin. I mean, it doesn't. I don't think it's I don't think it's a question of I don't think it's a question of having to do anything outwards necessarily. It's an inwards thing. It's a thing where we all ourselves change because of Bitcoin, and that's hard enough. That's enough, right? That's enough. If you've gone through the change, I think you wait, right? I think you wait for the rest of the world to change. Now, how can you can help individuals? You can. I mean, here's what I'm doing. Like, we just get together. People are stressed out about the normie world. Let's just come together and realize why we don't need to be stressed out, right? And what the stakes are. Yeah, I think the stay humble thing is the right. That's it. It's to stay humble and stack sats. I think it's a personal, like, remember, what we are promoting here is personal responsibility over our money, over many things. And I think the old Jordan Peterson adage of clean your room is about all we need to do, right? It's about it. Patience brings good fortune. Yeah. I'll just address the sounds unethical. Yeah, he's not I don't think he's in it for the ethics, BTC Moon guy. I think Bowtied is a typical Wall Street guy who admits that he's a Wall Street guy, and is playing a Wall Street game, and is just the smartest Wall Street guy out there, right? And who's predicting Wall Street is over. Yeah, I think if you're playing with Wall Street people, you're not in the ethics game. Like, that's just the way it works, right? It's not an ethics thing. Yeah. Inspect the hand that spontaneously feeds the mouth. Yeah. Bowtied is pumping. Yeah, I mean, look, I also have a reverence to the SEC. I don't give a shit about the SEC. I don't think they should be able to adjudicate any of this stuff, frankly. I just don't care about the SEC. They don't factor into my worldview, let's say, and a reverence of the SEC is most appreciated. Most appreciated. Now, is he ripping people off? I don't think so. The whole point of his newsletter is to, like, he'll tell you when to get out of everything, right? He's like, that's a scam, get out. We've already scammed enough there, go. I don't follow his trades. I follow him for his writing and his interesting takes, and he's always got something to say, especially about where things are headed with the mainstream Wall Street stuff, right? That I follow him for Wall Street information. The Bitcoin stuff is just implied, but I follow him for the Wall Street stuff. And I love the whole idea of degen island. I'm a terraformer. I want to terraform stuff. So, yeah, I don't look to him for religious guidance or anything like that. Castaneda has a great line. The warrior waits, he knows he's waiting, and he knows what he's waiting for. And while he waits, he feasts his eyes on the world. I'll look it up. It's great. Yeah, check it out. Yeah, he might be. I mean, he might be ripping people off. I don't know exactly what his story is, BTC Moon Guy. I mean, I'm happy to interview him, and I'll be talking to him about that stuff. I'll do a bit more research before I interview him, but I'm mostly interviewing him about the memes and the community stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean, maybe, maybe, maybe. But again, I will say that the number one way to get into Bitcoin is to be a shitcoin failure, right? Like, there's nothing else that teaches you about Bitcoin better, Well, I don't know if he's a scammer, BTC Moon Guy. I mean, yeah, I don't know if he's a scammer. Um, I don't know. I mean, I think he makes his money on the Substack. So, I think he makes his money on the Substack. That's my impression. Ad hominem. Yeah, I mean, look, I just don't know how it works, right? I just don't know how he works. I think he tells everyone to jump into this and jump out of that. But I don't even follow that part of him. I'm really interested in his Wall Street bank takes, right? He was first on this bank collapse thing. He's got a lot of intelligence there because of his bow tied network. He has all of these guys writing stuff all the time, right? And yeah, he's got some pump and dump. Yeah, it's happening. Yeah, I'm not denying that. Yeah, I'm not denying that. Yeah, yeah. But like I said, he's got a lot of great takes. So you can't. I think of him as an artist again, right? It's art. It's art. Like, you know. Yeah, you can't please everyone. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, if he did, like, if he was behind a project and it was a clear failure, I think he's more like, he does zero research on this stuff. By the way, he's not like, this is going to work. He's like, that guy's rich and he's going to pump it. You should probably go take money off. He definitely scam artist. Yeah, he definitely tries to push everyone into saving in Bitcoin if that makes a difference. You know. But again, I'm doing the interview on him for all of this stuff, the writing, the Wall Street piece, all of it. I think he's an interesting guy. I've never met him. I didn't, I've always wanted to meet him. These anons are always interesting people. He has never been in public before, so it'll be the first time he's ever in public. I think he's like Doomberg. All right, team. No, he doesn't have any. He doesn't release any coins himself. That's not something he does. He's never done that, right? Never, 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 never. He's more like, and I don't think he ever. I think the only coin he really tries to get people to buy would be Stacks, which is a shitcoin, right? But I think he is very heavily interested in Stacks and all that stuff, the Bitcoin stuff. But that's the only thing I've seen from that. All right, team. Peace. Thanks for making it, everyone. Thanks for making it. We enjoy our mornings together. I'll be around tomorrow. Not Sunday, but I'll be around tomorrow. Peace.